Sagittarius. When the universe whispers before the storm breaks. The universe's whisper. Before a storm arrives, the wind falls still and the sky turns unnervingly quiet. For Sagittarius, you can feel that change in your heart before you ever see it in the world around you. It's there in the flicker of an averted gaze, the faint smile that doesn't quite reach the soul, the long pause between two people who once spoke with ease. Something unspoken hangs in the air, not loud enough to name, yet too real to dismiss. The universe is whispering to you, not to plant suspicion but to prepare you. It's the soft voice of protection, the way a trusted friend might place a hand on your shoulder before you take another step forward. You've always been guided by a faith in the goodness of life. That faith is part of your beauty. It's what allows you to trust, to hope, to believe in people even when others turn away. But it's also what makes you vulnerable to missing the quiet cues, the subtle warnings that come before truth reveals itself fully. The stillness before the storm isn't a threat. It's an invitation to steady yourself, to anchor your spirit before the winds change. In these moments, you are being asked to trust the deepest part of you, the part that feels without needing proof, the part that knows without explanation. It's the ancient instinct your soul has carried through lifetimes, whispering now to remind you. Storms don't arrive without a signal. And if you learn to hear them, you can stand unshaken when the first drop falls. If these words already stir something within you, I invite you to journey deeper with me. Like this message so others may find it, share it with someone who needs its reminder, and subscribe so you'll never miss the next whisper the stars have for you. Gate 1. The first signal. When intuition speaks. For you, Sagittarius, the first signal rarely comes with fireworks or flashing lights. It arrives quietly, slipping into your awareness like the faint scent of rain before a downpour. You notice something in the way a person's voice shifts when they speak your name, or in the way they avoid meeting your gaze during a moment that once felt effortless. Subtle, so subtle you could dismiss it in an instant, and often you do. Because here's the thing. You are wired to believe in the best of people. That's one of your greatest gifts, but it can also be your blindfold. When you catch that first flicker of something off, your instinct isn't to pull away, it's to rush in with understanding. You make excuses. They're tired, they've been stressed, and probably just overthinking. You soften the sharp edge of what you felt so it doesn't cut too deep. But your heart knows. It has always known. I think of Marin, a Sagittarius I once met during a workshop. She told me about the night she first felt the shift with her partner. They were sitting at the kitchen table, talking about nothing in particular. She made a small joke, something that would have earned an easy laugh before, and instead there was only a faint smile, one that didn't reach the eyes. The silence stretched longer than it should have. She felt something sink inside her, a weight she couldn't name. But almost immediately she told herself it was nothing. He'd had a long day. She didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing, so she let the moment pass. Days turned into weeks. That same strange quiet began to show up in other ways. A softer voice, a distracted expression, hands that used to reach for hers but now stayed still. And every time she noticed, she explained it away. It wasn't until months later, when the truth finally came to light, that she realized she had been carrying it all along, from that very first pause at the kitchen table. Sagittarius, your intuition is not some random gut feeling. It is the oldest, most loyal companion you have. It is the echo of every journey your soul has walked, every truth it has learned to recognize. That first signal you receive? It's your inner compass quietly reorienting itself, trying to point you toward clarity before the storm clouds gather. The problem is, we live in a world that often teaches you to mistrust that compass. Society praises proof and evidence, making you believe that your feelings alone aren't valid unless they can be verified by someone else. But what happens when you wait for proof? You give the storm more time to grow. You give the truth more space to hide. Ignoring that first whisper doesn't make it disappear. It simply forces it to speak louder later. The longer you deny it, the more it will twist inside you, until one day it bursts, not as a quiet knowing, but as a jolt that shakes you to your core. By then, the choices you have are harder, and the path forward is often more painful. The first signal is a gift, even when it's uncomfortable. It's the moment the universe leans close and says, "Look here. Pay attention. Something is shifting." It may not tell you exactly what's wrong, but it's asking you to trust yourself enough to explore it. That exploration might mean asking hard questions. It might mean observing more closely. It might mean admitting to yourself that what you're feeling is real, even if you can't yet explain why. You don't have to act immediately. Listening to your intuition doesn't mean you cut people off at the first sign of change. It means you hold that signal with respect instead of brushing it aside. You give it a seat at the table alongside logic, patience, and compassion. You stop gaslighting yourself into thinking you imagine what you felt. Because here's what's most important. The first signal isn't always about someone else's behavior. It's often about your own boundaries. It's your soul telling you, this matters to me. This is worth noticing. The quicker you acknowledge it, the less likely you are to drift away from yourself. Marin told me that after her experience, she made herself a promise. She would never again ignore that first flicker of knowing. Not because she wanted to live suspiciously, but because she realized that protecting her peace started with honoring her own perception. And when you, Sagittarius, begin to live this way, something shifts. You stop seeing your intuition as a fragile thing that can be overridden by reason. You begin to see it as the most reasonable part of you, the part that sees the storm before the first drop falls. So the next time you feel that whisper, that subtle tightening in your chest, that moment where the air between you and another shifts, pause. Listen. Don't rush to explain it away. Don't shrink it down to fit your comfort. Let it be as big as it needs to be, because it might just be the signal that spares you the heartbreak of being caught unprepared. Gate 2. When you look away from the signs. Sagittarius, the universe has always had its own way of speaking to you. It speaks in patterns, in small repeating details, in quiet but persistent nudges that seem to follow you wherever you go. You might call them coincidences, but deep down you know better. They're signs, threads woven into your days, designed to guide you toward clarity long before the storm arrives. A song you haven't heard in years plays in 3 different places within a week, stirring a sadness you can't explain. The same number shows up on a receipt, on a clock, on the license plate of the car in front of you. A dream repeats itself, changing only in small ways, like a story trying to be told but getting lost in translation. Or maybe it's more physical. A heaviness you feel in the pit of your stomach whenever you're around someone, even though they've done nothing wrong on the surface. These are the universe's gentle taps on your shoulder, the whispers in your ear saying, pay attention. But here's the truth. When you desperately want something to be true or not to be true, it becomes so easy to look away. You tell yourself it's all in your head. You smile, nod, and carry on with your day, pretending the signs aren't there. You fold them into the background of your life like a photograph turned face down on the shelf. Feels safer that way, at least for the moment. I think of Leora, a Sagittarius who once told me about a time when the universe was practically shouting at her, and she still tried not to hear. She had been working with a close friend on a business project, something they dreamed up together for years. First, everything flowed, but then the signs began. Meetings where her friend would forget to include her. Documents changed without her input. Emails that hinted at decisions she hadn't been told about. Leora felt that sinking sensation in her gut, but she brushed it off, thinking we've known each other forever. She wouldn't do that. The signs didn't stop. They grew louder. Leora started having dreams where she was running through a maze, always just a step behind her friend, unable to catch up. She saw their business logo, something she designed, suddenly appearing without her name attached. Still, she told herself there had to be a reasonable explanation. And then one day she opened an industry newsletter and saw her friend being interviewed about her new project. No mention of Leora at all. In that moment, the signs she had been ignoring for months lined up like dominoes, toppling into a picture she could no longer deny. Why do we look away? Because accepting the signs often means admitting something we don't want to believe. It can mean acknowledging that someone we trust is pulling away. It can mean realizing that a situation we've invested time, love, and energy into is not what we thought. And for Sagittarius, loyal, optimistic, and deeply invested in the stories you build with others, that truth can feel like a betrayal not only from the other person, but from life itself. But here's what you must remember. The universe does not send you signs to hurt you. It sends them to protect you. It wants you to see the truth early, so you can make choices before the storm breaks. When you ignore the first whisper, the universe will speak again, a little louder. And if you ignore that, it will send the message more forcefully, sometimes in ways that are harder, messier, and more painful to face. You have a choice, Sagittarius. You can train yourself to notice and honor the signs early, or you can wait until they become undeniable. The difference isn't in the truth itself. The truth will always be there. It's in the cost you pay for delaying it. There's another layer to this. The signs you ignore aren't just about the people or situations around you. They're also about the parts of yourself you've been neglecting. Maybe the universe is showing you that you've been shrinking your dreams to fit someone else's comfort zone. Maybe it's reminding you that you've been staying in a place where your spirit no longer grows. These signs are not accusations. They are invitations to realign with yourself. So how do you stop looking away? You start by paying attention without judgment. Keep a journal of the signs you notice, even the ones that seem small or silly. You don't have to act on them immediately. Just acknowledge them. Patterns will emerge. Over time, you'll see that your intuition was right more often than it was wrong. And when that happens, your trust in yourself deepens. When the universe sends you a sign, it's like catching a glimpse of the first star in the night sky. You can ignore it and wait for the whole sky to darken before you look up. Or you can take that first star as the signal that night is coming and adjust accordingly. For you, Sagittarius, the choice will always come back to trust. Trust in your perception, trust in the unseen, trust that what you feel is worth honoring. Because the truth is, the universe never stops whispering. The only question is whether you will turn toward its voice or away from it. Gate 3: silence is also an answer. People often imagine that truth arrives in the form of clear words, an admission, a confrontation, a moment when everything is finally spelled out. But for you, Sagittarius, truth often comes wrapped in the spaces between words. It hides in the pauses, in the breath someone takes before answering a question, in the soft but unmistakable distance that settles between you and another. You have felt it before. The invisible line where connection used to flow freely but now feels carefully measured. Silence is its own kind of communication. Sometimes it is a loving pause, a moment of reflection. But other times it is the absence of something that used to be there, the willingness to engage, to explain, to meet you where you are. That absence is not random. It is a signal. The challenge is that silence is so easy to dismiss. Because there are no words, you can tell yourself there is nothing to address. You convince yourself they're just tired, just busy, just distracted. And maybe they are. But when the silence repeats, when it becomes the new rhythm of your connection, it is speaking louder than any sentence could. I once worked with a Sagittarius named Rowan who described this perfectly. He had a close friend with whom he'd shared everything. Late-night calls, spontaneous adventures, dreams and fears alike. Then slowly the silences began. Messages went unanswered for days. Plans became vague and often fell through. Conversations that once went deep now skimmed the surface. Rowan felt the change but told himself it was just a phase. He filled the quiet with his own explanations, giving them grace at every turn. But the truth was, their friendship had shifted, and the silence was not an accident. It was a retreat. When the final distance came, there was no dramatic ending, no argument. Just the realization that they had been drifting apart for months, and the silence had been telling him all along. This is where your Sagittarius heart often gets caught. You are wired to believe in reconnection. You are willing to bridge gaps, to meet people halfway, to hold space for them until they're ready to step back in. And while that generosity is beautiful, it can also keep you standing in a place where the other person has already left. Silence, when it stretches too long, is not a neutral space. It is a message. The hardest part is that silence doesn't give you closure. It leaves the door open just enough for hope to slip through, even as your intuition knows the room on the other side is empty. This is why so many people cling to silence. It allows them to avoid the finality of truth. But here's the thing. Ignoring silence doesn't make the connection come back. It only delays your own healing. The universe, in its own way, sometimes uses silence as a form of protection. Words can be manipulated, promises can be broken, but silence is harder to disguise. It forces you to feel the absence rather than distract yourself with noise. And for Sagittarius, that feeling, while painful, is often the turning point. It's the moment when you realize you are no longer being met where you stand. In your own life, you may have noticed patterns of silence that told you the truth long before you were ready to accept it. A partner who used to ask about your day now changes the subject. A friend who once shared everything now keeps their world closed off. A colleague who used to collaborate eagerly now avoids your input. None of these moments are accidental. They are the subtle withdrawal of presence, the quiet removal of energy. It's important to understand that recognizing silence as an answer is not about assigning blame. Sometimes people pull away because they are in pain, because they are overwhelmed, because they cannot give what they once could. But whether their reasons are fair or not, the impact on you is the same. You are left standing in a space that no longer nourishes you. And your spirit, Sagittarius, is not meant to live on crumbs. Learning to honor silence means learning to read it without bitterness. It means saying to yourself, this is information. This is truth. This is enough for me to decide my next step. It is realizing that closure doesn't always come from the other person. It often comes from you deciding that you have heard enough, even if no words were spoken. Rowan told me that once he accepted his friend's silence as an answer, he stopped sending messages into a void. He began putting his energy into people who showed up, who answered, who met him with the same openness he offered. It wasn't an easy shift, it never is, but it was a necessary one. And in the space that silence left behind, he discovered connections that were deeper, truer, and far more mutual. Sagittarius, your freedom depends on your ability to see silence for what it is. Not a puzzle to solve, not a mystery to obsess over, but a form of truth that deserves to be acknowledged. The sooner you can do this, the sooner you can reclaim your energy and aim it toward people and places that answer back. Because in the end, silence is never empty. It is full of information, full of direction, full of the truth you've been trying not to see. And once you choose to listen, you will find that you are no longer waiting in the stillness for someone else to speak. You are already walking forward, guided by the voice within that never goes quiet. Gate for intuition is evidence. From the time you were young, Sagittarius, the world has taught you to believe that feelings are not enough, that you must have facts, proof, and visible evidence before you can act. People told you not to jump to conclusions, to wait and see, to be sure before you decide. And while caution can be wise, this constant conditioning has often made you second-guess the one thing in life that has never lied to you: your own intuition. Your intuition is not a hunch pulled out of thin air. It is the sum of your perception, your ability to read tone, notice patterns, sense shifts in energy that can't be measured with numbers or captured in photos. It is the flame gifted to you by Jupiter, your ruling planet, the planet of truth, expansion, and higher vision. It is both ancient and deeply personal, shaped by experiences in this lifetime and beyond. When it speaks, it is because your spirit has already recognized something your conscious mind is still catching up to. Yet you have been taught to distrust it, to dismiss the very sensations that are meant to protect you. This is why so often you wait for tangible proof. A text you weren't meant to see, a direct confession, a visible betrayal, before you allow yourself to believe what you have felt for weeks or months. The tragedy is that by the time the proof arrives, the damage is usually deeper. The storm has already broken. I remember working with a Sagittarius named Alara, who had been in a business partnership for years. She began to feel a subtle discomfort. Projects were moving forward without her. Conversations seemed to happen in her absence. Financial reports were delayed. She had no hard evidence, only the unease in her gut. She told herself not to be paranoid, to give it time. Months later, she discovered her partner had been moving their shared resources into separate accounts for nearly a year. The shock wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about realizing she had known from the beginning and had silenced herself in the name of waiting for proof. This is the cost of mistrusting your own knowing. And for you, Sagittarius, the lesson is clear. Your intuition is proof. Not the kind that will convince a court or silence every skeptic, but the kind that should be enough to guide you. It doesn't need to be validated by anyone else to be real. If you feel it, if you see it, if the energy of it lives in your body, then it matters. Learning to treat your intuition as evidence is a form of self-respect. It is saying, I believe myself. I believe my perception. I trust my own inner witness. This doesn't mean you rush to action without thought. It means you stop dismissing the first and most reliable source of truth you have. You allow what you feel to inform your choices, not as a backup plan but as the primary compass it was always meant to be. The world may still try to tell you that you're being dramatic, sensitive, or unfair. People may accuse you of overreacting when you decide to act based on something they can't see. But here's the secret. They don't have to see it. You are the one who has to live in alignment with your own soul. And that means trusting what you know over what others are willing to acknowledge. The moment you begin to treat intuition as evidence, your life changes. You stop waiting in places that drain you. You leave relationships when the energy shifts instead of lingering in the hope that they will return to what they once were. You make career moves before the opportunity fades. Instead of clinging to something that no longer has room for you, you stop requiring other people's permission to honor what you feel. And the beauty of this shift is that it doesn't just protect you from harm. It also opens you to greater alignment. When you trust your intuition, you move faster toward the people, places, and opportunities that match your truth. You recognize resonance the same way you recognize dissonance, and you learn to follow what feels right without needing a guarantee. Sagittarius, intuition is not a soft secondary tool. It is not a backup plan for when logic fails. It is the firelight in the dark, the thread that leads you through the maze, the quiet voice that has walked with you through every storm. Treat it as such. Believe it the first time it speaks. Let it be enough to stand your ground, change your direction, or walk away. Because the real evidence is not always something you can hold in your hands. It's the steadiness in your breath when you know you've made the right choice, even if no one else understands it yet. And when you live this way, you stop waiting for the lightning strike to see the storm for what it is. You recognize it at the first whisper of wind, and you are already moving towards safety, guided by the truth that has always been yours. Conclusion: hear the whisper to avoid the thunder. Sagittarius, the universe has never wanted you to be caught off guard. It doesn't send the storm without first sending the stillness. It doesn't let the truth arrive without sending its quiet messengers ahead. Your intuition, the subtle signs, the silences that speak louder than words. Through this journey, you've seen it. The first signal you almost dismissed, the patterns you looked away from, the spaces between words that told you more than the words themselves, and the truth that your intuition is enough. Every step along the way, the universe was whispering, pay attention. Trust yourself. You already know. You don't have to wait for the slam of a closing door to realize the room is no longer safe. You don't have to see the lightning to know the air has shifted. When you listen early, when you honor the whisper, you save yourself from standing in the downpour, wondering why you didn't move sooner. More than that, you preserve something priceless. The light of your own spirit. Because every time you choose to believe what you feel, you protect the core of who you are. You keep your arrow pointed toward the horizon you were meant to reach. You move through life with a quiet confidence that doesn't depend on someone else's confirmation. And that is the real gift here. Not just avoiding storms, but learning to walk through them with the unshakable fire of your own knowing. If these words have reminded you of your own strength, let them ripple outward. Share this message with someone who needs it. Subscribe to keep walking this path together, and stay close for the next chapter. The winds will always shift, but your flame, Sagittarius, can burn steady through them all.